For those of you joining us, we will get started in a couple of minutes. We're just letting all of those who are registered into the meeting. So we will get started in just a couple of minutes. For those of you just coming into the meeting, we're just waiting for everyone to be admitted. We have about 120 people registered for today's session. So we're gonna wait just a couple more minutes to see if we can get as many people as possible here before we begin. We'll wait just one more minute for anyone trailing in, and then we'll get started. All right, so it's, I think we'll get started now. My name is Jen Drake, and I am a member of the Dutchess County Commission on Human Rights, and I'm here to moderate this afternoon's forum. So thank you for all of you joining us this afternoon to listen. We are here to listen to ideas from the community about police reform. I'll give some information about the Police Reform Collaborative in a minute, but first I'd like you to know that this Zoom is being recorded so that people can view it later on. To begin, I would like to welcome the elected officials who are joining us this afternoon. Please forgive me if I mispronounce your name or if I miss anybody. I'm going to do my best not to do that. So we have Ed Blundell, Mayor of the Village of Red Hook, Gary Bassett, Mayor of the Village of Rhinebeck. We have Vanessa Bertozzi, who is a village trustee in the Village of Rhinebeck, Angela Cole, who is a trustee from the Village of Tivoli, Susan Ezrati, also a trustee from the Village of Tivoli. Joel Griffith, mayor of the Village of Tivoli. Bill Jeffway, who is a board member from the town of Milan. Brennan Kearney, a Dutchess County legislator. Brent Kowalczyk, who is deputy mayor of the Village of Red Hook. Emily Major, deputy mayor of the Village of Tivoli. Christopher Munn, who is a Dutchess County legislator, my apologies, and William Noonan, who is a trustee for the Village of Red Hook. We also have Jennifer Quinn Carl from Red Hook. So many thanks to those of you who are joining us in your capacity as an elected official here in the county. Chief Deputy Jason Mark from the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office is also on the call, and there may very well be other police leadership that I'm not aware of who are on the call to listen to us. So thank you all for being here. And many thanks also to the American Sign Language interpreters from the Mid-Hudson Interpreter Service, a program of the Taconic Resources for Independence. Thank you for being here. So the reason that we're here today is because both the president and the governor have issued executive orders that require police reform. Governor Cuomo's executive order requires every municipality that has a police agency in New York State to create a police reform plan. Each municipality with a police agency, including the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office, must create a plan that covers all of the policy areas in the executive order. Dutchess County is leading a collaborative process that includes municipal leaders, police agencies, criminal justice council stakeholders, and community stakeholders to review research, best practices, and community feedback to create a county plan that can also be used by individual municipalities with police agencies to inform their own plans. This meeting is part of that process. Municipalities can decide to use all, some, or none of the county's plan. It will be up to each municipality to decide what is included in its plan. Once each municipality has its draft plan, they must get public comment on the plan, then create a local law or resolution to adopt and implement the plan, and send the final plan to the director of the New York State Budget Office by April 1st of next year. If you'd like more detailed information about the Dutchess County Police Reform and Modernization Collaborative, including information on those specific executive orders, you can go to the Dutchess County website. That's dutchessny.gov/police reform. So the purpose of tonight's forum is really a listening session to hear specific ideas from the public and suggestions about police reform. We've invited the elected officials and police leadership to be here to listen to feedback from the public. However, it is not a dialogue session where they will respond, nor will we be inviting elected officials to share their thoughts. To all of you in elected positions who are here, many thanks for being here to listen. If you do have thoughts that you would like to share, we invite you to use one of the other means available to you to do so. So speakers who have registered and have a connection to this geographic area will be given speaking priority. If there's time left, we'll ask anyone else who would like to speak to raise their hand, and our moderators will call on you. And again, this session will be recorded and posted on the same page where you registered, which is dutchessny.gov/police reforms. So any feedback that we receive here today will be used to inform the county's plan and also may inform your own municipality's plan. So the ground rules for today are that each speaker will have 3 minutes. When you get to the 3-minute mark, I will gently ask you to wrap up. And if there's more that you'd like to say after the 3 minutes, you can please use one of the other options available, including submitting your comments in writing through the website. So when your turn comes up, please state your name and whether you're representing an organization and where you're from. We would like to ask that anyone speaking refrain from naming individuals. And I will say this now and I'll say it more again throughout the meeting, but the question that we'd like everyone to have in mind as they speak today is this: what are your specific ideas for police reform? So with that, my co-conspirator here from Dutchess County, Rachel, Kashmir. Rachel, thank you very much for your participation today. Rachel is going to call on the first speaker. And again, please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. I will gently remind you when we get to that point to bring things to a close.
Thank you, Jen. First, we have Cynthia Glossier. Cynthia, go ahead.
Perhaps we can come back to Cynthia after the next speaker.
I think we're going to do that. We're going to go to Frank Intervallo.
Hi, how's everybody doing?
Doing well, thank you, Frank. Go ahead.
Just a couple of questions. You talked about putting together best practices, and I think that best practices already exist in the form of the accreditation standards, both national and New York State standards. Why are we reinventing the wheel? Shouldn't we just abide by those standards? I think there's a wealth of information in there that would guide every department on how to use the best practices.
Thank you, Frank. I'm just going to make a note that we're not going to be answering questions. So I appreciate that you're posing that to the process and to the collaborative. We can note your question. We're not going to be answering any questions though today. So if you have anything else to say, you have some more time.
No, I think that's it. I mean, it seems like it's an easier way to go. And it certainly has been developed already with public input.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you.
All right, next we're going to hear from Charles Simons.
Hi, yes, I'm not affiliated with an organization. I'm from the community of Red Hook, and yeah, I'm from New York City initially, and the issue of police brutality has weighed on me as I've grown up. I vividly remember watching Eric Garner's death at the hands of the city's police force, and I've spent a lot of my life kind of grappling with those themes of paranoia and fear as a young Black boy. In signing up for the forum, I was pleased to read that the state is mandating a plan, and so I believe that in our efforts to become more just, we have to engage in both collective and personal efforts. And so I was wondering, the two ideas that I come to today with are, one, increasing the number of civilian first responders, and then also creating an avenue for community feedback. And so I was wondering kind of where does Dutchess County lie on that? And so it's been shown, studies have shown that law enforcement agencies that create a workforce that encompasses a broad range of diversity tend to have better results policing. They actually, it's more effective, and it also breaks down one of the major barriers of trust. It creates a barrier. It creates an environment of trust with the community. And so I was wondering kind of, as we negotiate the question of how are we going to improve policing in the modern day, I think that one of the things that we should be looking at is this idea of creating a police department, or making sure that our police department reflects Dutchess County and reflects the communities in which it polices. And so David Sklansky of Stanford Law School said that when the police force integrates and begins to look more like the community it's policing, it removes one big impediment towards trust. This is true in Los Angeles, where as the city integrated and as the city became more diverse, the police force reflected that, and it was shown that 83% of residents in the last 4 or 5 years have said that the LAPD is doing a good or excellent job, and the frequency of the use of serious force has fallen each year since 2004. And so I believe that success is not limited to Los Angeles, and we should be looking to do something similar here. The other solution I think that we could look at is community feedback to kind of inform police department policies and practices. I think that the way that we police has to be an ongoing conversation that all members of the county can contribute to. And I think that would be really effective if we use the medium like a survey. An example of this is the Milwaukee Police Satisfaction Survey, and it's an example in which, you know, there is some sort of discourse going on between the residents and the police force. I think, you know, it was shown in the survey that Black residents felt a lot less comfortable and a lot less safe when they were engaging in police interactions. And I think that when you see the data and when you see those kind of trends, you kind of have to make sure that you understand that the community is being heard. And I think that, you know, when you hear the community, then you can respond to the community. So I think that when we implement mechanisms like that, we can kind of look towards increasing transparency and accountability. And I think that those are some things that we should be looking at going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Next, we'll have Amy Smith.
Hi, I'm Amy Smith. I'm a resident of Rhinebeck, but I spend the majority of my waking hours in Red Hook, where I work in public service. I'm sharing my thoughts and suggestions as an expression of my values, knowing that there is always more to learn. I'm asking our municipal governments to recognize that community involvement in the 203 mandated review of policing procedures and policies is essential to the validity of the review process. Public comment after a review is far less meaningful to your constituents. The county is asking for public input through these forums. Their review process includes community stakeholders, elected officials, and representatives of law enforcement. We need to emulate that on a local level. This forum cannot be a substitute for municipal level review and discussion. Community-based policing means involving the community, even though it's harder. It does not mean that our law enforcement professionals aren't respected by the community. It means building sustained relationships throughout the community to develop trust. It means that the professionals our communities hire need to have the PD training, interagency support, and legal accountability that the immense responsibility of law enforcement warrants. We need to give them these things. This is why the work cannot stop at the 203 review. There is a startling lack of transparency in policing in our communities. Red Hook Police Department needs at a minimum to establish a working website akin to what Rhinebeck has with officers listed and contact information. All departments need to consider whether the process currently in use for making complaints or stating concerns following police-civilian interactions is serving the whole community. We need to ensure that having no reports of racism in policing isn't a result of inaccessible or risky communication options for the civilians involved. We do not want to be communities that only value the voices of the people who are already speaking. We must listen and advocate for the voices of people who feel unwelcome or unable to speak. We need permanent civilian review boards established to create a broader forum for people to bring their concerns and for consistent reviews. Our area has several overlapping law enforcement jurisdictions. We are foolishly siloed in our thinking about boundaries among community and for law enforcement. Whether you're a resident of Tivoli that contracts with the Sheriff's Department, or a resident of the town of Red Hook with the RHPD, or a resident of Milan, or a resident of Rhinebeck, we are all crossing these jurisdictions daily. Red Hook Town and Village, Tivoli Village, and Milan came together for an inter-municipal task force on land use. That same model could be used to form a permanent civilian review board that addresses incidents and issues that arise in the policing of our communities. A single board removes confusion and disorganization about where to turn, how to report concerns, and who will be involved in any needed incident review. An intermunicipal review board tasked with policing will serve as a preventative and proactive means for us to ensure that law enforcement upholds the values of equity and transparency that we need as part of our community's reputation. This benefits residents, officials, and law enforcement professionals alike. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy.
Next, we'll have Felice Gelman.
To unmute myself. Sorry, now I'm unmuted, I think. Was that right?
You are,
Oh,
thank you.
sorry, I live in the town of Milan, and I really just have a few comments. And I have to say that this person who just spoke expressed many of the things that I really wanted to say, but I would go on to say a few other things. One is that this study of an effort to look at reforming the police department, to my mind, should be looking at reducing the role of police in our civil society. There are many things that police are called upon to do that other professionals are better trained for. And I would say, for starters, mental health crises, opioid overdoses, even domestic disputes are very often better dealt with by other professionals. And to my mind, that actually does not mean other professionals accompanying the police, because the police, given their monopoly on the use of force, their legal monopoly on the use of force, create a situation which is sometimes very difficult to resolve the kinds of situations that I'm talking about. So I think that reducing the role of the police in those functions is something very important to consider in reform. And of course, it means that other parts of our government have to get the resources to pick up those responsibilities. So that's something which I think doesn't take away from the, how would I put it, the standing of the police force, simply recognize an important reality, which is that they're being asked to do things that are not in their. The second thing is that I think that it's indispensable to have a public, transparent, and easily accessible form of review that does cover the multiple functions that our policing function operates within in these more rural parts of the county. There's how would I put it? It's hard enough when you're trying to get your road fixed to figure out who's responsible for the road. Is it the state? Is it the county? Is it the village? Is it the town? But when you have overlapping police jurisdictions, it becomes almost impossible to figure out who's responsible, what should be done, and for the voters and taxpayers to have a voice in what should be done. So I think that I'm going to wrap up my remarks, except for one other thing that I want to say, which is that we're not a particularly diverse area. And so people may feel that the issues of racism and discrimination don't exist here. But I think that that's actually way oversimplifying the problem. Any place where there are differences in income levels, where there are differences in race, even when there are differences in the legal status of the people who live in the area, and we do have many people here who are undocumented, those are problems, and they have to be addressed by the reform effort. Okay, that's what I had to say.
Super, thank you very much.
Next, we'll go to Marley Herring.
Hello, much of what I wanted to ask about has already been commented on and asked. I think, if anything, just to specify, a concern that I have is racially motivated 911 calls. And I am wondering what kind of training is in place for those in law enforcement when such calls are suspected. What kind of training is in place for those who are receiving the calls? Because I imagine that inevitably a social worker or somebody else may not always be the person who is coming to the scene even after reform, realistically. And so what protocols are in place and what kind of training is offered that can prevent escalation as opposed to de-escalation? Thank you.
Thank you, Marilee.
Next, we have Deirdre Burns.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Burns. I'm a resident of Rhinebeck, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I wish I could see the committee members who I'm speaking to, so maybe something you can think about in the future. But I have 4 points, 4 recommendations I want to highlight. One is I've been present when police have responded to mental health crises, and I think the county and every municipality should invest in mobile mental health units to respond to such crises. This will definitely benefit the person in crisis, but also anyone else involved in that crisis. And I think the police officers. I know police officers see a lot of things we don't know about that are difficult. And I think having mental health professionals be present is important. As another person who spoke mentioned, this idea is not new. It's also among those recommendations being made by the Ulster County Police Reform Committee. Secondly, I don't know what data is required now to be kept by the county or municipalities, but data should be kept and made public about police interactions with the public, stops, arrests, which communities they happen in, the reasons for the stops and arrests, and any time force is used or a gun is drawn. I know the governor's effort in his executive order was to address racial over policing of Black community, really. And I think that this kind of data will help inform us and address sort of like systemic racism. The data should also include military equipment that different police agencies have. It's possible that data is already available, but I think it should be on websites to address questions about the militarization of police forces. And all this data should be very transparent, should be made public on websites. Someone else addressed, I think really importantly, the overlapping police forces we have in the county. And I think we really need clarity on the different police forces and where they, what areas they serve and who's in charge. Like initially, really until it was clarified earlier, I thought this commission was sort of addressing the county police, the judges, the sheriff's office. And for example, I don't know who's in charge of the sheriff's office ultimately. Is it only the sheriff or is it the county executive? As other people have said, absolutely, there should be in every police department a citizen police oversight committee. The committee should meet regularly, not only in response to complaints, but to keep in regular communication and do oversight of that police force. And finally, my final point I want to make, there are a lot of reasons for policing, more than we're discussing here and more in 3 minutes than I could have, but one of which is because we are a nation of laws. Foundational to that is the peaceful transfer of power through elections. Our president is refusing to commit to this foundational principle. I'm very concerned that the sheriff, who I thought I would be addressing sort of through this commission, is on the president's reelection committee. And I guess I just want to say that if I'm to believe that this police reform committee is serious about the work, then the leadership of the sheriff's department should be addressed. We need to affirm that we're a nation of laws. And the committee should call on Sheriff Anderson to either renounce his support for the president or he should resign. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Okay, next we have Ross Gould.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. My name is Ross Gould and I'm a resident of Red Hook, New York. And I don't know if I could be seen or not, but if we were in a room where people could see me, I want to say that I'm a white male. And I say that because we're here for these reforms, for these reasons. My next words are that Black lives matter. Black men matter. Black women matter. Black children matter. People of color matter. To my fellow neighbors in Dutchess County who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, I hear you, I support you. I'm here to lift your voice up. I want to lift your voices up. I want you to, I'm glad to hear from earlier from the young man who spoke. I absolutely agree with what he said. Charles Simmons, please listen to some of the reforms he put on the table. And I agree with many of your speakers from earlier today. For far too long, Black, Indigenous, and people of color have been mistreated, abused, harassed, and yes, killed at the hands of police officers. While police kill about 1,100 people each year, a large disproportion of them Black, they also engage in massive applications of lower level violence, ranging from dog bites and the use of lethal weapons like tasers to aggressive harassing and unnecessary stops and searches, also directed disproportionately at Black people. Time for change is now, and I thank you for being here to change, but I would like to say that I'm a little concerned that you're saying the reason why we're here to change and the reason to be listened to today is because you're being required by the state. I want you to think about that. You shouldn't be being required to state. You need to be taking this action and now, and that should show that maybe it's time for a change in our leadership if people think it's a requirement and not an action that is required by the times we are in right now. We must seek to ensure there are proper safeguards against and punishment for police misconduct, excessive force, and racial bias in policing. I encourage and expect Red Hook Police Department and the Dutchess County Sheriff's Department to increase their transparency and keep the public engaged in their ongoing reviews and of procedures and policies. I stand here today asking you to take up this reform. Require body cameras and that they are in use anytime that the public is encountered. And the policing of nonviolent offenses, requirements of de-escalation must be taught, and bias training must occur as well. We need to establish a special commission to examine police policies and procedures. We need for everyone to be accountable and transparent. The lack of trust for law enforcement that exists in so many communities is due to a lack of accountability and transparency. Police departments should not investigate themselves, nor should justice depend on prosecutors who rely on local law enforcement for evidence to be brought to them. Instead, accountability systems should be directed by the communities that the police departments are supposed to protect and serve. You must also be transparent. We must take steps to root out excessive use of force. Data indicates that Black men are 21 times as likely as white men to be killed by law enforcement. Black women, transgender people, Native American, and Latinx communities are also disproportionately killed or assaulted by law enforcement. Racial disparities in use of force cannot be explained by disparities in crime rates. So what can you do? Well,
Awesome.
I demand create community accountability. One more thing I'd like to just hit on is training. There's inadequate training. I work in workforce development and workforce training. Training is so important in this. Training on de-escalation, also on implicit bias, racism, anti-racism, mental illness, age-appropriate responses, and mediation of culture competency. So listen, and one last point I'd like to raise up is term limits. We're having issues with the sheriff. There should be term limits in place to make sure that we have new limits. So I thank you for your time. I hope that you're listening, and please listen to the community, the Black, Indigenous people of color in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you.
Next up, Sarah Rosenthal.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sarah Rosenthal, and I am a resident of Rhinebeck. Again, just want to say a lot of wonderful points have already been made, and I'll try to keep it succinct to about 4 points. I think my overarching idea is around reducing the role of the police. Police over the years have taken on more and more responsibilities that they don't necessarily get appropriate training for, such as responding to mental health crises. I myself am a licensed clinical social worker, and I'd like to advocate that, one, instead of police in schools, we could be paying for more licensed social workers to be in the schools in a supportive role. I was recently at a school board meeting in Rhinebeck, and the idea was that we have the police there as a safe adult for kids to speak to. And I do not think that we need an armed individual in the school for children to speak with. I want to also advocate for something someone earlier said, I think Deirdre, that we have unarmed crisis workers instead of police available to respond to mental health crises. And I want to again reiterate what she said, which is that this is a benefit not just to the people in crisis and not just to the people who are there supporting them, but also to the police officers who do not ever get enough training in this to be able to respond. I want to also advocate for an end to police and ICE coordination, and in order to support our immigrant communities so that they can feel safe. And I want to advocate again for something that has already been said, which is strong civilian review boards. And I will also add that the NAACP recommends that those review boards have subpoena power. And I thank you all for listening, and I thank you to everyone who has already spoken.
Thank you, Sarah. Everyone's been really great about answering the specific question that we've been talking about. Just as a reminder, that is, what are your specific ideas for police reform? Thank you all for adhering so closely to answering that question. Freddie will, my colleague Freddie Garcia, also from the Dutchess County Commission on Human Rights, has joined us. And Freddie, thank you for being here, and thanks for calling the next person.
Not a problem. Next up, Emily Jones.
Thanks so much for hosting us here today. I'm relatively new to the area. I moved to Red Hook a little over 3 years ago. Within my first few weeks in the area, a state police officer showed up at my door. My husband had gone to church that Sunday wearing a backpack. Someone at the church thought the backpack was suspicious and expressed their concerns. So right after the church service, a couple off-duty police officers asked to search my husband's backpack. He let them. It contained his lunch, a sweater, and some papers and books for work. But despite these totally innocuous contents and the inappropriateness of the request to search his bag at all, another police officer was sent to our house for follow-up. I was home alone when he knocked on the door. He asked me a series of questions, why we moved to the area, where my husband worked, etc. The officer then went to my husband's job to verify his employment before returning a second time to my door. Neither my husband nor I had done anything wrong, but there we were being searched and being questioned. But the officer explained I had to understand that Red Hook was a close-knit community, that no one knew us, and that they were, of course, suspicious, so did what seemed natural, seeking police involvement. I've never felt fully at home here since that incident, and this is the low-level harm of using police when they're not needed. It makes people feel frightened and unwelcome. It undoes community togetherness. But we're here because there's actually a much deeper kind of harm that comes from over-policing. What we all witnessed this week in the Breonna Taylor verdict in Louisville. For me, however I felt, I was always physically safe. And this is the protection being white gives me. Before moving here, while walking down the street in predominantly Black or Latino neighborhoods, I've been stopped by police twice. On both occasions, it was to ask me if I was safe, to ask me if I needed a ride. As a white woman, I have gotten a presumption of innocence. And when brand new here in Red Hook, I burst into tears at a police officer showing up at my door. That officer comforted and reassured me, even telling me that he wore his pink shirt just so I'd be less frightened. In other words, I was fine. Breonna Taylor, however, was not fine, because when police came to her door with their suspicions, she was met not with a barrage of questions, but with a barrage of gunfire, not with a sheepish explanation, but with a death sentence. For many people of color, over-policing has hurt more than feelings. Over-policing took Breonna Taylor's life, George Floyd's, Mike Brown's, Eric Gardner's, Tatiana Jefferson's, so many more lives across the country. We haven't had a Breonna Taylor story or a George Floyd story here in Red Hook or the surrounding towns, at least to my knowledge. But we're desperately naive if we believe that it couldn't happen here. Of course it could happen here. We have all the ingredients: an over-reliance on policing, a fear of perceived outsiders, a culture that criminalizes people of color, and baked-in structural racism. And so my recommendation is to address over-policing. The time to address over-policing is before we get to such a violent and tragic end. And in the process, we can create a community that does actually welcome us all.
Thank you, Emily.
Next up, we have Christopher Murphy.
Good day. My name is Chris Murphy. I'm a resident of Red Hook, New York. I have no organization affiliation. and I am a former trustee from the Village of Tivoli Board of Trustees. When the group was put together and the announcement was made on June 30th by Mark Molinaro, I had concerns right away. The community stakeholders group is mostly made up of law enforcement and local government. Only 10 members are actual community members, while 7 are currently or retired police or associates. 4 are from the Dutchess County Legislature. 4 are from the Dutchess County Judicial Branch, and 2 work on the Dutchess County Criminal Justice Council, which works very closely with local law enforcement. No representative members that I can tell are from Northern Dutchess County, nor from our local college, Bard College. My question, how does the county executive, the DC sheriff, and the county legislatures, who have presided over one of the worst jails in New York State, and also a viral police brutality case involving teenage girls that represented the unaccountability of police recently in Poughkeepsie, believe that a group that is meant to represent community stakeholders, yet is primarily compromised of 17 out of 27 members of individuals that are entrenched and work side by side with local law enforcement and have been for decades and are part of this problem in our country, can effectively enact police reforms to end racist policing, to uphold racial justice, and also protect our minority communities of the whole Dutchess County. While I'm at it as well, I like to say also, I'm a white male. I have 2 children. We try to teach them as much as we can about racial justice and the injustice that is in our world. I support Black Lives Matter, and I'm an ally of people of Black Indigenous people of color. One of the easy things that this group can do, besides looking at itself in the mirror, is to look at what was proposed by campaignzero.org and broken window police policy, community oversight, limit use of force, independently investigate and prosecute, community representation, body cameras, film the police, training, end for-profit policing, demilitarization, and fair police union contracts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Next up, we have Cynthia Glossier.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
I joined late before. A couple of things I want to do. I want to thank our police officers and our deputies. I think I've had, as a victim of violent crime, I've had experience with them. I also understand in our country right now and in our communities the problems that we face. I think that we as a county need to pay more attention to mental health, and that includes mental health for our police personnel. I would like to see, as part of our mental hygiene committees, I would like to see a focus on trauma therapy for our police officers and our deputies. I think it's important that we think about their mental health. In addition to that, I think there needs to be increased training on how to handle mental health issues, how to handle drug cases and drug overdose cases. I know that we do some of that, but we need to put that on steroids. We need to put the mental health training on steroids, and we need to put the trauma training for our law enforcement personnel at the forefront, because they see so much, and they too have a great deal of trauma in their lives that has to be processed and has to be dealt with. That would improve our policing in general. I share the concerns of people who have spoken about politics and policing. We are seeing in Virginia armed militia people who support our current president, who are intimidating people at the polls as they go to vote. And as we approach this election and as we approach voting here, I do hope that our law enforcement officials will put politics aside and look after our voters and do not allow the intimidation to occur. And I think as part of our police improvements, we need to question and think about leaders endorsing candidates, whether they're Democrat, Republican, or otherwise, at the level that we've seen in this election, particularly on the part of our sheriff. I think that does not lend doesn't lend credence to our public safety, does not make us feel safe. Finally, I want to say that we need to look at the military aspect of policing. Do we want our police officers to be warriors, or do we want them to be helpers? I think that we are not really looking for our police departments to be soldiers and warriors. I think we're looking for them to be able to be helpers and also to de-escalate very stressful situations. And that's where the mental health treatment and the mental health focus on mental health and adding social workers and adding psychologists to our police department, that's where that comes in. So those are my thoughts, and I appreciate this forum. I appreciate all of the work that that our police departments do and that our county and local officials do. But we have to focus on this. We can't continue to politicize policing.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Geraldine Wilcox.
Freddie, I'm sorry. I think Geraldine has left the call.
Got it. Thank you. So now we'll open it up to folks who may want to speak who didn't pre-register. To do so, just raise your hand and we'll call on you accordingly. So next up, we have Danielle Del Rosario.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can, Danielle. Thank you.
Great. So first, I'd like to urge both the Red Hook and County Police departments to watch the Tivoli listening session that happened over the summer. I forgot to mention in the beginning, I'm a resident of Tivoli. Because there were a lot of important incidents that all local police should be aware of. I'd also like to urge all of the police departments to have all of the officers, everyone working in law enforcement, to watch this session as well, because there have already been so many stories about police incidences that don't seem to have been handled properly. I'd also like to urge Ed to host a similar session that like the one we did in Tivoli, and like this, where residents, especially residents of color of Red Hook, can publicly share their experiences with our local police department. As a woman of color, after attending the listening session and hearing all the shocking stories people had during police encounters, it made me skeptical that there weren't officers that knew about these incidents, which means people were aware and did nothing about it. And if there was something done about it, it clearly wasn't effective, since the incidents kept recurring. So I think, and this may be unrealistic, but there needs to be a serious conversation with all the police departments about protecting one another, because the police are supposed to be there to serve and protect the people, not each other, which seems to be a trend among police departments. And of course, other occupations have a similar culture, but other jobs don't carry the burden and responsibility to prioritize the safety and well-being of the people. I know there are people here that believe that the current system is fine and that there doesn't need to be reform or drastic reform. But to those people, I'd like to ask you to remember that your personal experiences do not represent those of the different communities within our towns. So please listen and learn from the stories that you hear today and that you hear from other members of your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle.
Next up, we have Melkorka Jerval.
Hello. Hello, my name is Melkorka Caravel. I live in the village of Red Hook. Our nation is grappling with racism. The police are not immune to this reality. I would like Red Hook to take a proactive and preventative measures to make sure that violent incidents resulting from bias that are happening all over our nation don't happen here. I was surprised that leadership in Red Hook hadn't personally heard of the reputation Red Hook has, and when the issues were brought to their attention, they proceeded to dismiss the legitimacy of specific incidents. I believe they did so because they have not had training or experience handling the issue of racism. I believe the model of waiting for a report to be submitted through existing channels, which then arrives at the desks of people who are not trained to handle such matters, is not working. I would propose a permanent human relations committee on all municipal levels that can be a safe and confidential way for residents and families to inform trained government representatives of discrimination or harassment related to any kind of bias that they experience, including from law enforcement within our communities. I would also propose a permanent Inter-Municipal Civilian Review Board that could be a collaborative group of regional municipality representatives from the village of Tivoli, the village of Red Hook, and the town of Red Hook, similar to the one formed to consider green space over a decade ago. The review board could be tasked to review confidential reports on police conduct and our law enforcement contracts on an ongoing basis. I would like a crisis call sheet flyer to be sent out to residents quarterly. That way, if there were sensitive situations like domestic violence or mental health issues, people could have numbers and resources on hand to call before it reaches a 911 emergency. I would like more transparency. I would like there to be an effort in educating and informing the public about what forces serve which communities. The village should post its budget on the website. There should be a working Red Hook police website. Perhaps if there was a website, it could answer the following questions. In sensitive situations like domestic violence or mental health crises, or communicating with people who do not speak English, do our police regularly partner with other community programs that have specific expertise and skills in those areas? What is the budget for ongoing officer training, and what are those training courses? Can I, as a private citizen, read the union contracts that the Red Hook has agreed to? What happens if a Red Hook police officer does something egregious? Would qualified immunity protect them from any legal repercussions? Now that 50A was repealed, what is the process for me as a private citizen to view any such misconduct records? How inclusive is the language of our local laws? Do they need updating? Has the police budget increased proportionally in line with the civic social programs in the last decade? How much of the police budget is spent on military-style tactical equipment? Have the Red Hook police received federal funding to purchase such surplus military gear? The school resource officers. Is there a place we can review if there's been an increase in suspensions or arrests since they were hired by the school district? And finally, are the Red Hook police currently noting and recording the race or ethnicity of people during traffic stops and arrests so that we, the public, can review if those interactions are proportional to the percentage of BIPOC people in our area? Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to everyone else who has spoken before me.
Thank you, Melkorka.
Next up, calling on Susan Foreman.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for being here and listening today. I'm currently actually a resident of Claremont, but my son's father lives in Red Hook and my son attends Red Hook School. And I actually wanted to talk about an incident that happened this summer when I had a home invader in the middle of the night and was very uncertain what to do about it and didn't want to call 911, ended up calling 911. And part of the decision-making process lay in the fact that my home intruder was a young white man and I was less fearful for his interaction with the police. I actually was concerned about protecting him in addition to my own discomfort and intimidation by interacting with police. As a woman and as a single mother and as a woman living alone, the idea of inviting men armed with guns to my house in the middle of the night was incredibly uncomfortable. So I had I spent probably 5+ minutes researching on the internet who I even should call, if there even was anyone to call, if there was anything to do beyond calling 911. And it's, as many speakers have already pointed out, it's incredibly difficult to find any other services besides 911, and it's incredibly difficult to find a working website. So I understand that in this situation, my police department was Livingston, and that's not the purview of this listening session, but I was also unable to turn up police departments in a working website for Red Hook. And as I said, my son is in the Red Hook School District, and I live in the Red Hook School District. So I'm very concerned about the policing in schools. I am also a supporter of Black Lives Matter, and find the every interaction I have with the police so far in this small town, having lived in cities all over the world and throughout the country, to be very uncomfortable and intimidation based. So a lot of this, I uphold everything that has been previously said. And I just want to reiterate my desire to see more transparency and much more of a thought towards how we can employ civilian services beyond armed police. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Next up, Emily Russo.
Hello there, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Emily, thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Emily Russo, and I'm a resident of Red Hook. I moved here about 5 years ago, and I have to say that there are quite a few things that I would like to see changed in our community. One of the things that I think is most important is the transparency. I have no idea of clear definitions of roles or delineation of roles for sheriff, police, state troopers, who's going to call when I call 911. I also think we should have other numbers, as the previous caller said, for non-emergency situations where crisis management teams, mediators, and conflict resolutionists can come in place of police officers. I also think that training of officers in the state of New York should be at a higher level. As an educator, I'm required to have 6 years of education in order to work with children. And it seems that in Dutchess County, you can have 13 weeks of a training course to become a police officer, and then an additional 639 hours of service. Then if you want to work in a school as a school resource officer, an additional 5 hours of training is required. I don't believe a school resource officer, in my opinion and experience, is a helpful person to have in your building because it can be used as an intimidation technique against students. Police officers are not allowed to speak to children without their parents' consent, and yet the school resource officer is used in that role quite frequently. I also think that our website in Red Hook is non-existent and unclear as to who should remediate that. I understand that we have a new website, but even the old one is not clear on who you should be calling or what services are available to you. And then pretty much everyone said things that I would support before me, which is that there should be civilian review boards and a combined effort for all of those different roles or agencies. So like the sheriff, the town police, the village police, the state troopers, and who's going to come in a situation and who you should be talking to. I think that should be clearer and more transparent for the community. And I will yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Emily.
Next up, Bailey Williams.
Hello, my name is Bailey Williams and I live in Red Hook. I'm grateful for this forum today, but I also want to acknowledge that we likely wouldn't be having this discussion without the governor's 203 order. This is not due to any lack of existing issues or a lack of a need for police reform, but rather, I believe, a reluctance and resistance of officials to acknowledge and address the issues that do exist, both nationally and in our little town and village of Red Hook. I'm troubled that concerns of police brutality, harassment, and racism are frequently met with one of two answers, both equally dismissive. Either that doesn't happen here, and if it did, I would know, or yes, just like it happens everywhere. The first is a denial of the problem by a gatekeeper, whether naive or purposefully obstructive, that no issue could possibly exist without their knowledge. I don't expect my leaders to be all-knowing, but I do expect them to be willing to listen and accept that just because they haven't heard of it before doesn't mean it hasn't and isn't happening. The discussion of police reform must also include a discussion of racism. Red Hook is a very white community. I am not surprised that these issues have not held a prominent place in discussions here, but now is our chance to change that. I would like, as part of the reform process, for our leaders to carefully consider fully and thoughtfully why these existing issues have not been brought to their attention previously, and how will they create a culture and process that welcomes and encourages feedback, especially from people for whom coming forward may come with a great deal of fear. The comment that this problem exists in Red Hook simply because it exists everywhere is a complete avoidance and rejection of responsibility. Racism is deeply embedded in our country. I do not know if it can be fully extricated, at least in my lifetime, since it was so fully built into our founding, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. The same voices that tell me that Red Hook is a special, welcoming, and uniquely beautiful place are the same voices that tell me that we ought not to be alarmed when racism appears within our community. Racism is unacceptable in any form, at any level, period. And when it occurs, it needs to be named, called out, and addressed. I would like this police forum to be proactive and preventative. Don't wait for the issue to fully rear its head. Implement best practices into our systems now so that we don't get to that point. My specific suggestions for police reform include a town and or village process outside of the RHPD for complaints and feedback. This process ought to be regular and routine to assist with any ongoing issues. Regular police town halls for community feedback. Transparency on trainings, policies, and reprimands for misconduct. An investigation and then implementation of other agencies to address issues that don't require an armed police presence. I do not believe that we are going to fully solve the issues with policing through the governor's order, but it is a start. The real test in my mind will be what comes after. Do we continue the work? It is my hope and my intention to ensure that our municipal leaders and police leadership see this reform process for what it ought to be, the opportunity to learn and grow, to renovate an abusive system, and to be rid of harmful and racist practices, as well as a chance to be the community that we claim to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey.
Next up, Kahan Sablo.
If you can just unmute yourself. Kahan, if you can unmute yourself. There we go. Sorry, we still can't hear you.
Looks like we might be having some difficulties here.
Perhaps we can come back to Kahan.
This moment, there's no one else. Again, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. We'll in priority put folks who haven't spoken yet, so feel free to do so now. We have Chris Murphy.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak again. I'd just like to point out that it seems Dutchess County is Northern Dutchess County is very different than Southern Dutchess County. And it seems like a lot of voices are from Northern Dutchess County. And I'd just like to point out that the white privilege is being shown here. The fact that us in Red Hook, Rhinebeck in this area have access and are coming to this meeting, whereas many voices in Poughkeepsie and Beacon, Wappinger Falls are actually not being represented in this. And there needs to be more outreach by this group, the reform group, to get those voices out, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And there are other sessions which will be focused on other parts of the county.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, I forgot. You're right. Correct.
That's quite all right. Thanks for your comments.
Next up, Cynthia Glossier.
I just wanted to say, I failed to say that I'm from Red Hook. I lived in Rhinebeck for 20 years and I just moved here a year ago. I wanted to mention that this was predominantly a Red Hook Rhinebeck forum. And I wondered how the participation was at the other how the participation has been at the other forums. I find that to be very interesting. And I also want to know, I'm hoping that there will be a quick response and a quick takeout in terms of what is the result of these forums. In addition to that, I would like to see very clear communication across the county as to who the policing authorities are, what the different policing authorities do, and what people need to do if they have issues on any level. Very almost like a communication chart sent to everybody in the county. This is what happens when you need police help. This is what happens when it's an emergency. This is what happens when you want to know more about what is going on in the county in regard to law enforcement. I believe that the communication levels need to be greatly improved. And I also believe people from the north end of the county and people from the south end of the county need to be brought together on a regular basis for discussion about our communities and how we can accomplish things together. If COVID has taught us anything, it's that we live in this county, this Dutchess County. We also find ourselves all connected and in need of information regarding public health. And a big part of public health is law enforcement and how it operates. So I would love to see clear lines of communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. This does seem like a good time to point out that those of you on the call, I'm guessing that you are connected to the county's communications outreach methods, but for anyone who's not, I encourage you to go to duchessny.gov where you can sign up for the Dutchess Delivers email distribution on a variety of different topics. It's a great way to stay in touch with what's happening in the county, including information about this process and the additional forums.
Thank you, Jen. For those, also just a reminder for today that the question we're trying to answer, what are your specific ideas for police reform for anyone who's joined us later? So next up, Perry Allen.
Hello, hi there. Thank you so much for listening. Many people on the call today have spoken quite eloquently about the matters at hand, and I only want to second what many of them have said. I feel they can say it more succinctly than I. As a resident of Red Hook, I am just eager to see my community and the police force take a proactive stance on what we are seeing to be a national and local awakening as to things that must happen within our police and their relationship to our communities. I have heard tale from Black, Indigenous people of color locally, as well as students in the area who feel intimidated by the police presence. And I hope to live in a community in which all of these people can feel welcome and supported proactively by our local administration. I second so much of what has been said today, and I hope to see things change. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Perry.
Next up, Savannah W. Savannah, you can try unmuting yourself.
Savannah, you're still muted.
Savannah, we'll move on to the next person and then we'll circle back right after. Next up, Jeremy Greenberg.
Hi, thank you for hosting this. I live in Tivoli. My children go to Red Hook. I didn't expect myself to want to talk today. I really appreciate everything everyone has said. And along with the review board in each municipality, and along with mental health officers supporting our law enforcement, I would also, I think any opportunity that Dutchess County can find to having an increased police presence in the lives of our citizens that have nothing to do with law enforcement, so that we somehow begin to bridge this separation. You know, we're so divided politically right now, and I think it's going to take a lot of work to get politics out of law enforcement in the coming months especially. But moving forward, that we can interface with law enforcement on a regular basis, even separate from review boards. Just whether it's painting, you know, street painting day in Tivoli, that we see people as people in our community. Because I have a lot of friends who are in law enforcement, and I know what their families go through. But I also have a lot of friends of color, and I sure as hell know what they're going through. And so I just think we have to try to find ways that we can bridge the gap that have nothing to do with law enforcement per se. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
We'll go back to Savannah.
Okay, I think I got it working now.
We can hear you, Savannah. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Savannah Williams. I'm a resident of Red Hook. I've been living here for about 5 years, and I would like to see more transparency with the police force, as well as more clear definitions of, like many people have said, who polices where, who are you going to get when you call.
Savannah, we're losing you a little bit.
Savannah, I think the last thing we heard was more clarity around who polices where. If you could pick up there, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Just basically knowing who's going to come when you call, as well as kind of making a better connection with the community, with the police force, as well as with Bard College. I'm alumni, and most of the interactions that I had with the police, I was met with rudeness, inability to answer questions, etc. So I just think a little less intensity from them and a little more community. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Savannah.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call Sarah and Bowden.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sarah.
Great. So I'm Sarah Bowden. I live in Tivoli, town of Red Hook. I'm a former town board member in the town of Red Hook. And I wanted to basically second a lot of the things people are saying, especially Bailey, Cynthia, Deirdre, and Amy. But I'm agreeing with just about everything people are saying. And I wanted to lift up sort of 3 things out of those things, and like, well, yeah, 3 things and then 1 new idea. One, I think we do need the same process to go on in Red Hook. Tivoli's done a great job of doing listening sessions where they're really hearing from folks in the community. I think something that could be added in the Tivoli portion would be to somehow add law enforcement into the listening. But Red Hook really hasn't done anything, and I want to see that happen. Especially because we really have a lot of levels of police presence going on in Red Hook. There's some that we have local control over and some that we don't. And so added to that, then of course the transparency issue that many people are talking about. It's so confusing for people to understand what the Red Hook police, who are Red Hook police affiliated with, who to talk to if there was a problem. Same with the county, same with state police. And so really helping people, whether it would be a website, I love the idea of a mailer. People are getting water bills regularly and all kinds of other bills. There's got to be a way that we could be sending out information that's like clear and really helps people understand who's policing them. I love the idea of a civilian review board. I think that could be really effective. And personally, I think having an intermunicipal one is a good idea, both because I worry that we would be able to find the volunteers to serve on a board like that with consistency and longevity. And also because so many of our issues are intermunicipal between Rhinebeck, Milan, Red Hook. And finally, my one idea that I'd like to add to the mix would be a way that folks could weigh in on these ideas who were not able to be here. So I wonder, as we're bringing up these ideas, many people agree with them, but many people couldn't be here. And I understand the recording will be available, but I'd love to see some kind of website where you could then go on and kind of see all the ideas that have been collected as you've done all these forums, and then be able to say like this, you know, or like out of 1 to 3, how do I rate this idea? Or just some way of the wider community being able to weigh in and express their views. So I think that's all I got. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Next, Andrew Jones.
Hello. Yeah, I wasn't planning to speak, but I now feel inspired by much of what I've heard, which I agree with. I mean, I think there's an overall meta theme that ought to be acknowledged, and that is around professional standards. And there doesn't appear to be clear professional standards. In the corporate world, in the most extreme sense, General Electric had an up and out policy. And that was designed to get rid of the 5% of lowest performing executives. And I feel that some kind of up and out policy should be considered here as a way to ensure that standards are held up to. And I think what comes along with that is the notion of accountability as well. Our current commander-in-chief, if you want to call him that, used an unfortunate term when it came to policing of saying that sometimes police will experience choke moments, like playing a game of golf and sort of like choking and missing the ball. That is completely unacceptable when it comes to policing, because people's lives are on the line, sometimes literally. So again, accountability should come down to ensuring that there's a professional pride in not choking. I also think that conceptually, we need to change the attitude of the police from enforcers to problem solvers. Many of the issues at the end of the day are about solving problems, which requires a different mindset than that of being an enforcer. An enforcer of rules is somebody who's purely about maintaining the status quo, as opposed to trying to solve the challenges that we face within the community. And lastly, I just want to throw out something as a potential example of something. A few years ago at the Harvard Business School, the MBAs signed a charter, or like 55% of them, I think the percentage was, signed a charter that basically said that they were going to stop thinking about using their MBA simply as a way to exploit people and make money, and that instead they were going to look for ways to do good in the world. And I think that it would be a good idea if we could establish with our police professionals the notion of a charter that police officers have to sign on to, or that we would encourage police officers to sign on to. No racism, no authoritarianism, no politics in the way that they approach their jobs. I feel that notion of a charter that is voluntary, but is something that would start to change perceptions and attitudes in terms of how they need to deal with people in the community, and give and be more better listeners and better handlers of people within the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Next up, Emily Jones.
Thank you so much for the time and for all your work in this commission. This is just a process note. Part of what I feel and what I heard from many other folks is that part of the concern is around over-policing, that police are taking on functions that that they might not be best equipped to engage with. So I want to encourage, I know there are constraints on this per Cuomo's order, but as we're reimagining, I think that it would be really fruitful to bring in other agencies and entities in the county as well. So we can think holistically about what functions are being held within what entities, and how might we shift that. So I would love to have a second tier conversation that is also engaging differently with social services, differently with school boards and school systems, differently with housing entities as well, because I think that there's a real possibility to get more ambitious in our thinking if we're not just putting it all on the police to say, how do you reform yourselves sticking within a very narrow box, but we recognize that perhaps you're doing some work that is beyond your mandate and actually is not helpful to continue to exist within your purview. And so we're thinking about how do we shift shift within this larger system, so we aren't just criticizing police for over-policing, but then not addressing the question of where do functions lie and how do we address this. So I would love to be part of and encourage that conversation to happen at the county level as well, because I think it could enable some possibilities as we bring together some of these different systems. And thank you again, Ms. Drake and Mr. Garcia, for your time.
Thank you, Emily.
Next up, Eric Steinman.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, Eric. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for organizing this. I very much appreciate it. And I think it's constructed a very interesting dialogue. I just want to simply say that I think what we need is to establish a community-based policing system is an entirely new public safety system based on social and economic equity, bolstered by a network of nonviolent emergency responders. I feel like we need officers who are friendly, mentally well-adjusted, highly trained guardians of the community. Maybe through incentives, curriculums, and hiring programs, departments could create officers who prioritize de-escalation and nonviolent intervention, abide by strict anti-discrimination laws, operate under strong transparency protocols, and stand accountable to local civilians. In essence, I think this is not about defunding or abolishing police departments, but it's more about better equipping our police and providing to some degree of enlightenment and more of a direct connection with the community. And that's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric.
At this moment, we don't have any other hands raised. I'll give it a couple of minutes. Again, what we're trying to answer, what are your specific ideas for police reform? Also, we have someone, William Noonan.
I'm sorry, Mr. Noonan, you are an elected official, is that correct?
Actually, I'm chiming in to make a correction. I was identified as a Red Hook trustee, and I'm not a trustee. I'm a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Very good.
Thank you.
And a concerned citizen.
In that case, we invite you to speak. My apologies for misidentifying your position.
Yeah, thank you. There was a lot of discussion about the mental health aspect of policing, and people were asking where to go, what to do. And I don't know if this would be appropriate right now, but Dutchess County does have a mobile mental health team. I suspect they're terribly unfunded. And The number is 845-485-7900 or toll free at 877-485-9700. It's a resource and may help with taking some of the burden of mental health issues off the police. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, William. And again, my apologies for misidentifying your affiliation.
No
Thanks
problem.
for setting that straight.
Do we have anyone else? I see Cynthia Glossier.
I think Cynthia has already spoken, actually.
It would be great if we could have that mobile mental health numbers made into a magnet and sent to every single household in Dutchess County so that it could be put somewhere, so that it could be used and explained, and also not have our mobile mental health unit cut, in fact, increased in terms of funding, despite the fact that we are currently, I understand, going to be in budget distress because of COVID. I think that we need to think about seriously figuring out a way to boost mental health services in this county. I think that's of most and great import. Thank you. Thank you both for this forum.
Thank you, Cynthia.
So I don't see any other hands at this moment. So we'll kind of start migrating to our closing remarks. Again, we want to thank everyone for participating. Just a reminder, please feel free to send your comments through the website at dutchessny.gov/police reform. So whether you spoke or wanted to add any additional comments, feel free to do so on the website. We also encourage you to go on the website for updates and information, and to reach out to your municipality for questions regarding the status and the process. If you do have any questions about the process itself, you can also reach out to Ken Roman, who's the chair of the collaborative. His email is kroman@dutchessny.gov. Again, that's kroman@dutchessny.gov. And he's also listed on the website, so you can find that there. Again, we really want to thank everyone for participating today on a Saturday afternoon. Special thanks to our ASL interpreters for all their work. And again, please visit the website. We'll have to share any comments, but also if you want to rewatch the recording of this forum. Just some quick reminders. We have another forum session on Tuesday, September 29 from 6 to 8 for the city of Poughkeepsie. We also have some Spanish language forums, and these are county-wide, so not geographic area specific. And that's on Tuesday, September 29 from 10 to 12 p.m. Which it will be the first forum in Spanish. On Thursday, October 1st from 6 to 8, another Spanish forum. And then on Saturday, October 3rd from 3 to 5. Registration for all the forums and the dates are listed on the website at dutchessny.gov/police reform/community forums. Again, thank you for taking the time. And we look forward to the follow-ups in the coming months. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you all. Good afternoon.